We're going to begin chapter 3. 7 weeks at chapter 2, and now we're going to do chapter 3. I thought we would get chapter 2 done in 3 weeks. I think we'll get chapter 3 done in 2 weeks. What good does it matter what I think? Okay, we're going to read. We'll read. I really enjoyed studying this chapter for this. So I pray that you do as well. Daniel chapter 3, verse 1. Nebuchadnezzar, the king, made an image of gold whose height was 60 cubits and its width 6 cubits. He set it up in the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. And King Nebuchadnezzar sent word to gather together the satraps, the administrators, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, and all the officials of the provinces to come to the dedication of the image which King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. So the satraps, the administrators, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, and all the officials of the provinces gathered together for the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. And they stood before the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. By the way, just before we were the Jewish, I don't have it in the notes, but the Jewish Study Bible makes a point that the way that all the lists, especially in this chapter, they're intended to sound comical. Like the book of Esther has a lot of comedy in it, so it just sounds comical, and so it makes it a point in the Jewish Study Bible. All right, so verse 4. Then a herald cried aloud, "To you it is commanded, O peoples, nations, and languages, that at the time you hear the sound of the horn, flute, harp, lyre, and psaltery," another list, "in symphony with all kinds of music, you shall fall down and worship the gold image that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be immediately cast into the midst of a burning fiery furnace." So at that time, when all the people heard the sound of the horn, flute, harp, and lyre in symphony with all kinds of music, all the people, nations, and languages fell down and worshiped the gold image which King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Therefore, at that time, certain Chaldeans came forward and accused the Jews. They spoke and said to King Nebuchadnezzar, "O king, live forever. You, O king, have made a decree that everyone who hears the sound of the horn, flute, harp, lyre, and psaltery in symphony with all the kinds of music shall fall down and worship the golden image. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. There are certain Jews whom you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, have not paid due regard to you. They do not serve your gods or worship the gold image which you have set up." Then Nebuchadnezzar, in rage and fury, gave the command to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And so they brought these men before the king. Nebuchadnezzar spoke, saying to them, "Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the gold image which I have set up? Now, if you are ready at the time you hear the sound of the horn, flute, harp, lyre, and psaltery in symphony with all kinds of music, and you fall down and worship the image which I have made, good. But if you do not worship, you shall be cast immediately into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. And who is the God who will deliver you from my hands?" Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If that is the case, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us from your hand, O king. But if not, let it be known to you, O king, that we do not serve your gods, nor will we worship the gold image which you have set up." Then Nebuchadnezzar was full of fury, and the expression on his face changed towards Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He spoke and commanded that they heat the furnace 7 times more than it was usually heated. And he commanded certain mighty men of valor who were in his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and cast them into the burning fiery furnace. Then these men were bound in their coats, their trousers, their turbans, and their other garments, and were cast into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Therefore, because the king's command was urgent, and the furnace exceedingly hot, the flame of the fire killed those men who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these three men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell down bound into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Then King Nebuchadnezzar was astonished, and he rose in haste and spoke, saying to his counselors, "Did we not cast three men bound into the midst of that fire?" They answered and said to the king, "True, O king." "Look," he answered, "I see four men loose, walking in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt. And the form of the fourth is like the Son of God." Then Nebuchadnezzar went near the mouth of the burning fiery furnace and spoke, saying, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out and come here." Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came from the midst of the fire. And the satraps, administrators, governors, and the king's counselors gathered together. And they saw these men, on whose bodies the fire had no power. The hair on their head was not singed, nor were their garments affected, and the smell of fire was not on them. Nebuchadnezzar spoke, saying, "Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who sent his angel and delivered his servants who trusted in him. And they have frustrated the king's word and yielded their bodies that they should not serve nor worship any god except their own God. Now I will make a decree that any people, nation, or language which speaks anything amiss against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be cut in pieces, and their houses shall be made an hash heap, because there is no other God who can deliver like this." Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. This chapter, I put a verse to kind of cover the whole chapter, 1 Peter 1:7, that the trial of your faith, being much more precious than of gold that perishes, though it be tried with fire, might be found unto praise and honor and glory at the appearing of Jesus Christ. There are two schools of thought in Judaism about Nebuchadnezzar's golden image. The first school of thought is that the image is idolatrous, just an idol. But the image, the other thought, it was not an idol. It was set up for the glory of the king. Since it was set up to promote the golden head of Babylon, it is essentially a symbol for Babylon. And this view would essentially make it analogous to those who will want to require for Americans to stand during the national anthem. It's very similar. Okay, so in other words, stand during the national anthem, kneel during the national anthem, kneel before the statue. It's actually quite similar. So is this an idol, or is it more like that? There is a Jewish thought that the base of Nebuchadnezzar's statue was made of the gold from Israel's temple, and it was intended to symbolize that Nebuchadnezzar would build an all-conquering and eternal kingdom upon the never-to-rise ruins of Israel's nationhood. Take Israel's gold, put it on the bottom, build a statue on top. Now, Nebuchadnezzar made this image of gold. The chapter actually gives us Nebuchadnezzar's reaction or his response to Daniel's interpretation from Daniel chapter 2. Remember, he has that dream, and it has the statue, and the head was made of gold. And in Daniel chapter 2, verse 38, he says to Nebuchadnezzar, "You are the head of gold." And so this is now Nebuchadnezzar's response to that experience. On page 2. This is actually this idea, which I find is kind of interesting. You may find this interesting. This is actually right out of Art Scroll. So this is solidly Jewish now. The statue represents 6 periods of kingdoms of humanity. The first is the golden head of Babylon. The second is the silver chest and arms of the Medo-Persian Empire. The third is the bronze belly and the thighs of Greece. The fourth is the iron legs of Rome. The fifth is the iron and clay feet of a latter kingdom. And the sixth is God's kingdom on the earth. So let's remember now what Babylon is about. It is about self-worship. And you can see this at the birthplace of Babylon, which is the Tower of Babel. Okay, so in Genesis chapter 11, verse 4, and they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower, whose top is in heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be scattered abroad over the face of the whole earth." So let's make a name for ourselves. Self-glorification. Very similar to Satan's lying trick in Genesis chapter 3, where the serpent said to the woman, "You will not surely die. For God knows that in the day that you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." The lie is very similar. It's no surprise then that the leader of such a people is going to build an image to worship him after the revelation of that kind of dream. So he's in Babylon, he's in Babel. He's going to build this for self-worship. And the devil's trick has always been to get us to worship ourselves or to get us to think more highly of ourselves than we ought to think. That's the trick here. Now you can see the lie in Genesis chapter 11, verse 4, let us make a name for ourselves. Okay, and the idea is we're going to build a tower whose top is in the heavens. This sounds a lot like out of the story of Lucifer's fall in Isaiah chapter 14, where you have the 5 I wills of Satan. I will. The same lie. Satan's trying to get us to be like him. I will. Okay, I will exalt myself. I will make a name for myself. That's the lie. And you can see the 5 I wills. How are you fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? How are you cut down to the ground, you who did weaken the nations? For you said in your heart, I will ascend into heaven. This is really sounding a lot like the Tower of Babel here. I will extol my throne above the stars of God. It's sounding a lot like I'm going to build a tower whose throne's in heaven. I will sit upon the mount of the congregation on the farther sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. Yet you shall be brought down to Sheol, to the lowest depths of the pit. So the devil's schemes can all be summed up with the words, I will. I will do what? I will do whatever I want. That's Satan's trick right there. To get us to think that we can actually do whatever I want. And in the book of Judges, it says 3 times that every man did what was right in his own eyes. That kind of sounds like the world today. In Acts chapter 12, we can see pretty much the same thing. This is New Testament. So on a set day, Herod, arrayed in royal apparel, sat on his throne and gave an oration to them, and the people kept shouting, "The voice of a God and not a man." And then immediately an angel of the Lord struck him, because he did not give glory to God, and he was eaten by worms, and he died. One thing that's interesting about that is that's New Testament. You know, it's New Testament in Acts when Paul blinds Elymas. It's New Testament in Acts when you have Ananias and Sapphira dying, right? Being killed by the Holy Spirit. That's all New Testament. And so this idea that the New Testament is all grace and the Old Testament is all harsh, I completely reject that. Okay, in the Old Testament, in the book of Hosea, his wife does what she does, and God says, well, bring her back as an act of agape love. Why did the church develop this doctrine? My honest opinion, because the early church, after you get about 100 AD, it becomes so virulently anti-Semitic. And so anything that made the Jewish world look good had to be bad, right? And so the church has this, honestly, the church like the universal church, built this doctrine that was so anti-Semitic. And I believe that in the last days, this deck of cards is going to collapse. And the truth is going to come out that God has always been the same. He did not change. I am the Lord, I changed not. He has always been a God of love and grace and mercy. And you'll find just as much in Revelation, you'll have two witnesses who are calling down fire and plagues. That's still to come. That's New Testament. So the idea that the New Testament is gracious and the Old Testament is harsh, that's a man-made doctrine built by the early church fathers who were as anti-Semitic as anybody on the planet. That's an honest statement. Okay, so going over to page 3. The height of this thing was 60 cubits, and its width was 6 cubits. So the NIV, I gave 2 NIV translations here, the 1984, the original NIV, and then the most recent NIV, the 2011. You'll see that in one of them it will say 90 feet high and 9 feet wide, but it actually does say 60 cubits high and 6 cubits wide. So the older NIV just was helping you with the language, telling you, because what's a cubit? A cubit's 1.5 feet. So it's the same, but they're using language to help you. Okay? So the immense size of the statue does create some questions that we should probably think about. Okay, well, first of all, the image could be sitting on a pedestal, and only the upper part of the image could possibly resemble a human form. The obvious intent here is for the image to impress by nature of its sheer size. So that's kind of the picture there. The unique size of it, though, is not unique for the ancient world. There's 3 examples there. For example, Zeus has in the temple at Babylon a 12 cubit high idol. So that's pretty big. That's 18 feet. It's not 90 feet, but it's pretty high. Then there are golden images on the top of the Belus temple, and you've got some stuff on the right column there that you can look at later if you like. That golden image that's 40 cubits high, so that's about 60 feet. Again, it's not quite as high it's about 2/3 as high as the one that Nebuchadnezzar builds. But the Colossus at Rhodes is actually 70 cubits high, which is taller than Nebuchadnezzar's. It's 105 feet high. And so the size of it is not really unusual for the ancient world. It's big, but it's not unheard of, I should say. Herodotus describes the Bel statue as being made up of 800 talents or 22 tons of gold. So this statue of Nebuchadnezzar's is not out of any historical context. But if we go over to page 4, the proportions of Nebuchadnezzar's image seem so unusual. We have to wonder how it is able to stand at all. By way of example now, okay? I am 66, maybe I'll say I'm 66.5 inches tall. I don't want to lose that 1/2 inch. I think I actually may have, I'm sorry. But I'm 66 inches tall. Okay, so from shoulder to shoulder, I'm 21 inches wide. If a 90-foot, 60 cubits tall image had my proportions, it would be 28 feet wide. But Nebuchadnezzar's image is only 9 feet or 6 cubits wide. So maybe a smaller image sat on a tall pedestal, which could account for the unusual proportions. That would work. That way, only the upper portion of the image would actually look like a person. Of course, Daniel chapter 3 does not actually say that the image looks like a man. Doesn't say that. But we want to remember that the chapter falls on the heels of chapter 2. And in Daniel chapter 2, Nebuchadnezzar dreamed about an image which did look like a man. So there's a good reason now to assume that the statue looks like a man. And only the head or the top of the image is made of gold. In the dream, it is possible that only the top is made of gold, but probably not from the way this is described. Nebuchadnezzar's entire statue, the entire statue itself, could be solid gold. Pliny has an account of an all-gold image at Anasus, which was looted, and the thing is made up of overlaid plates of gold. So it could be solid gold. But perhaps it's actually not. I kind of lean this way, that it's actually something that's gold-plated and not solid gold. Okay, for example now, what if the thing were actually an image that's built out of a tree? In modern Iraq, date palms will grow to about 90 feet or 60 cubits high, and they're slim like Nebuchadnezzar's image. The image could then have a wooden interior like a tree and be gold-plated. Gold plating seems like a good possibility. In the Old Testament, the golden altar of incense was made of acacia wood, and it was overlaid with gold. Now, that's Israel. This is Babylon, but still the ancient world, so that's very possible. There is a similar contemporary dilemma that actually is occurring even in our lifetime here, and that is Israel's was Israel's temple golden menorah solid gold, or was it plated gold? That's a good question. The Temple Institute in Jerusalem. How many of you have been to Israel? So you've probably all seen the golden menorah in Israel, right? In Jerusalem. You've probably all seen it. Okay, so the Temple Institute in Jerusalem has recreated articles that are necessary for the rebuilding of the temple. And with one exception, all the articles are built with the exact details given by the Torah. But the Institute was not able to build the menorah to the exact specifications that Torah seems to command. In Exodus 25, verse 31, it says, "You shall also make a lampstand of pure gold. The lampstand shall be of hammered work." Well, it is traditionally understood, or it has been traditionally understood, that this lampstand of pure gold is actually a lampstand then of solid gold. But the problem is they can't figure out how to construct a menorah of solid gold without the arms of the thing just collapsing down because it is so heavy. So their website, this next section is right off of their website explaining how they dealt with this issue. It is also possible that, as opposed to the method described above, Bezalel would have created an armature, perhaps out of wood, and then the beaten gold sheets to conform to the shape of the armature. Gold is a very heavy material and a very soft material. A menorah made of solid, pure gold would not be able to support itself. A thin gold menorah supported by an internal skeleton would be able to support itself. A metal armature substructure was made by the Temple Institute to ensure structural strength and stability. So the inside of that thing that you've seen is actually made of metal. The gold menorah that the Temple Institute built, they used 95 pounds of electroplated pure gold onto a bronze menorah, created a single seamless surface that is 1 millimeter thick. The Talmud says that Israel's golden menorah was 18 handbreadths tall. A handbreadth is 3 or 4 inches, so the golden menorah then was between 4.5 to 6 feet tall. Wikipedia says it's 5.3 feet tall, so there's a little bit of variance there. It's hard to really figure out what it actually is. But you got the picture here. It is quite possible, because if Israel's modern artisans cannot figure out how to build a solid gold menorah, it is reasonable to doubt if Nebuchadnezzar's artisans could do so. So the tree option all of a sudden now becomes a real possibility, because it's the height of a tree and it's the shape of a tree. So it's a tree. Which, by the way, it just occurs to me as I'm speaking, is interesting if you think about just the idea, and there's going to be some issues here, that Jesus hung on a tree. Yes. So there are other verses that describe the process of fashioning idols of gold. Isaiah 40, verse 19. The workman molds an image. The goldsmith overspreads it with gold. Or Jeremiah chapter 10. For the customs of the people are futile. For one cuts a tree from the forest. the work of the hands of the workman with an axe. They decorate it with silver and gold. So it's a tree, and it's decorated with gold. They fasten it with nails and hammers so that it will not topple. They are upright like a palm tree, and they cannot speak. They must be carried. And then it says, because they cannot go by themselves, do not be afraid of them, for they cannot do evil. And that is essentially what Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego say. They say, we're not afraid. No matter what you do, we're not going to be afraid of what you do. As we go over to page 6, there is no doubt that some are going to be interested to note the way that the number 6 is introduced in Daniel chapter 3. Nothing in Daniel chapter 3 highlights the number, but some would find this interesting. In Revelation chapter 13, verse 14, I'm actually going to finish this chapter today, I think, or this half of the chapter. In Revelation 13, 14, the false prophet sets up an image in honor of the Antichrist. He then forces people to bow down and worship it. Part of their worship includes receiving the mark of the Antichrist. Revelation 13, verse 18. Here is wisdom. Let him who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666. 666 is also the proportions of Nebuchadnezzar's image. 60 cubits by 6 cubits we're told, and it is very logical to think that the other dimension is going to be 6 cubits if it's a tree. So 6, 6, 6. 666 also sounds, by the way, you might find this interesting, very similar to the sexagesimal system. It's a word we don't use very much. Anybody here ever use the word sexagesimal? You did. You got one person? 2 people. Academic papers. Okay. Dr. Rudolph, you've probably used the word sexagesimal. I don't think I've ever used it outside of the story of teaching on Daniel. The sexagesimal system is an ancient numeric system based on the number 60. The mathematical system was used for counting, for calculation, and for numerical notations. The number system was used in the Sumero-Akkadian region, which is basically Near East Mesopotamia, and you can still see it in our world today with divisions of time like 60 minutes, 60 seconds. The degrees of a circle, 360 degrees. A dozen, okay, that's 6 times 2. And the gross, like my dad was a manufacturer, and so he made belts. And amazingly, I managed to only get beat twice. I definitely deserved one of them, and the other one I didn't. So, but I did the one. And there's a lot of times when I should have, but I didn't. So I don't hold anything against him for that at all. But he would use the word gross because he would make belts and the factory, and they would sell them by the gross. That was the actual language, by the gross, 144 of them. You might find it interesting that the Egyptian number system is actually a decimal system like ours. Okay, so Nebuchadnezzar's image seems to be a symbolic foreshadowing of the day then when the Antichrist is going to set up an image in the temple and require people to worship him. Now, I think you'll find this interesting on page 7. I've always thought this was interesting since I first saw it. Regarding the image of the beast, here's an interesting eschatological observation, an observation about the last days. In the book of Revelation, we have the mark of the beast, and we have the image of the beast, and they are never mentioned without both of them being mentioned. They're always mentioned together. I thought about just saying it, but I thought, you're in the room, and for the learner, it's worth reading them. So the first example, Revelation 13. He performs great signs so that he even makes fire come down from heaven on earth in sight of them. And he deceives those who dwell on the earth by those signs which he was granted to do in the sight of the beast, telling those who dwell on the earth to make an image to the beast, who was wounded by the sword and lived. He was granted power to give breath to the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause many, as would not worship the image of the beast, to be killed. He causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on their right hand or on their foreheads, and that no one may buy or sell except one who has the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. See, it mentions the image and it mentions the mark. Okay, Revelation chapter 2. Chapter 14, verse 9. Then a third angel followed them, saying with a loud voice, if anyone worships the beast and his image and receives his mark on his forehead or on his hand. Revelation 14:11. And the smoke of the torment ascends forever and ever, and they have no rest day or night who worship the image and who worship the beast and his image, and whoever receives the mark of his name. Revelation 15:2. And I saw something like a sea of glass mingled with fire, and those who have the victory over the beast and over his image and over his mark. Revelation 16:2. So the first went and poured out his bowl upon the earth, and a foul and loathsome sore came upon the men who had the mark of the beast and those who worshiped the image. Revelation 19:20. Then the beast was captured, and with him the false prophet who worked signs in his presence, by which he deceived those who received the mark of the beast and those who worshiped his image. And Revelation 20, verse 4. And I saw thrones, and they sat on them, and the judgment was committed to them. And then I saw the souls of those who had been beheaded for their witness to Jesus and for the word of God, who had not worshipped the beast or his image and had not received his mark. So one of the things that I find interesting about this is because they are always mentioned together, never one without the other. And since we have some clear references that we'll see throughout the book of Daniel, that the image will be set up in the last days in the middle of that tribulation time, if that's when the image goes up, then we would probably expect then that that is when the mark of the beast occurs, which means that we should not expect that anything like the mark of the beast would happen before that final 7-year period, nor should we expect it in the first half of the 7-year period. We should expect that they would come together because they're never mentioned apart. In the book of Revelation, what happens to those who refuse to worship the beast? They experience great tribulation. In the book of Daniel, what happens when these 3 young men refuse to worship the image? They're cast into a fiery tribulation. Now, the image is set up in the plain of Dura. What is Dura? It's a word that means a dwelling. It comes from a word that actually means a walled place, like a wall around a city. Okay, the basic there's a root word that Dura comes from, and the basic meaning of that root word seems to be to move in a circle. So some early houses were circular. Generations recur in a cyclical fashion. The basic meaning may refer to dwell, which is a derived meaning indicating that which is circular, like, for example, a heap. And there is, notice I'll say the cognate Akkadian noun. Acadia was the first ancient empire of Mesopotamia. That's 24th to the 22nd centuries BC. This is the first empire of Mesopotamia. And a cognate is a word that is a related word from another language. So it's a related word from another ancient people who are right from there. And that word refers to a city wall. And in our language, we would say something like round the city. So that seems to be round the city. That's kind of the meaning of the word Dura. Going over to page 8. Dura was a common name which could apply to any place that could be enclosed by a wall. So these next 3 things are, I think, they're helpful. The first comment is right out of Sonsino. You all know Sonsino. It says that Dura is not identified with certainty, but according to some authorities, it is near Tulul Dura on the river, which flows into the Euphrates 6 miles south of Babylon. So that's Sonsino. That's Orthodox Judaism. The next comment is Walvard. He's Baptist. The consensus of conservative scholarships is that most probable location is a mound located 6 miles southeast of Babylon, consisting of a large square of brick construction, which would have ideally served as a base for such an image as Nebuchadnezzar erected. Then we get to the third comment. Now this is from ArtScroll. They're even more orthodox than Sansino. Okay, and they say that Rabbi Alshitz said that based upon the Zohar, Dura was a place where the Tower of Babel was built. So all three of these sources are saying the same thing. The most likely place for this is 6 miles southeast of Babylon. And a large brick construction has been found which could have served as the base for Nebuchadnezzar's image. That large brick construction is about 14 meters square. It's about 6 meters high, so that 18-foot base could be part of that 90-foot statue. You would still have a statue, though, that is 62 feet high on top of that. Okay, so as we come into, should I stop here? Yeah, we're gonna. You know what? This is a good place to stop. I'm going to stop right here at the top. So we actually covered one verse. That's insane. That's what we did. Was we covered one verse. We did one verse. All right. So next time we'll do the second verse. I really liked studying this chapter because I really felt like some of the stuff in here, you got all of these, the military positions on the bottom of page 8. And what you're going to see is a lot of stuff that seems to relate to political correct kind of stuff. That's where this chapter is going. What's really happening in this chapter now is there's going to be this connection between what is the government requiring, the law, and what are you allowed to believe. And that's where this chapter is going. So this chapter really is going to really speak to the world that we're in now. I think everybody can see that. What are you allowed to believe, and what is the government doing about that? And so the whole idea of political correctness, and we'll also look at how we'll be able to see how the three young Jewish men grew up, because they have grown. They have become men between Daniel chapter 1, chapter 2, and chapter 3. They're not young people anymore. They're actually men by the time we get to chapter 3. So that's where we're going to go.